The little boy stood at my bakery counter with one hand buried deep inside his empty pocket and the other wrapped around a crumpled $5 bill that was no longer there. Behind him, the afternoon sunlight poured through the front windows, turning the glass display case golden, but his face looked as if all the light had somehow missed him. He stared at the last apple pie on the shelf, swallowed hard, and asked in a voice so quiet I nearly didn't hear him, "Can I pay tomorrow?" I should have asked where his mother was. I should have explained that businesses couldn't survive on promises. Instead, I placed the warm pie in a box, slid it toward him, and told him tomorrow was already taken care of. I had no idea that one small act of kindness would bring his mother into my life, or that months later she would stand beneath the spring sunlight, tears trembling in her eyes, and confess, somewhere along the way, I started wanting you. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Lifeline Vibes if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that begin when someone chooses compassion instead of turning away. My name is Callum Reeves, and at 36, I owned a small bakery called Morning Hearth on the corner of Alder Street and Pine. It wasn't the kind of place people photographed for magazines. The wooden sign above the door had faded around the edges, one floor tile near the register was permanently cracked, and the old brass bell rang too loudly whenever someone entered. Still, the bakery was mine, or at least it belonged to the bank and allowed me to pretend it was mine as long as I made the payments. I opened before sunrise every morning, mixed dough while the rest of the town slept, and filled the display case with pies, bread, cinnamon rolls, and pastries that reminded people of kitchens they had once felt safe in. The work kept my hands busy, which was useful because busy hands left less time for remembering. 3 years earlier, my younger brother, Merrick, had died in a highway accident on his way home from work. We had built Morning Hearth together using money our father had left us and 1,000 reckless promises about turning it into a chain someday. Merrick had been the charming one, the one who remembered every customer's name and slipped free cookies to children when he thought I wasn't looking. After he died, the bakery felt too large, even though it was barely wider than a living room. His apron remained on its hook in the back for almost a year before I finally folded it and placed it in a drawer. I kept the business alive because closing it felt too much like losing him twice. But I had stopped imagining a future beyond the next mortgage payment and the next morning's batch of bread. The boy who asked for the pie was named Orrin. I learned that when he returned the following afternoon, walking through the door at exactly 3:30 with a handful of coins and a folded note. He couldn't have been more than 8. His dark blonde hair stood up at the back as if he had been running, and his backpack looked far too heavy for his narrow shoulders. He placed $4.12 on the counter and pushed the handwritten note toward me. It said his mother was sorry, that she had not known he had gone into the bakery alone, and that she would bring the rest as soon as she could. At the bottom, in different handwriting, Orrin had added that the pie had made his mother smile for the first time in many days. I slid the coins back toward him. He hesitated, looking almost frightened to take them. I told him the pie had been the last one of the day and would have gone to waste anyway, though that was not true. I had planned to take it home and eat a slice while sitting in the silence of my kitchen. Orrin seemed unconvinced, but he gathered the coins and thanked me. Before leaving, he looked at the trays behind the counter and asked whether baking was difficult. I told him it was mostly patience, heat, and learning that a mess could still become something good. He nodded as if I had offered him a secret that mattered. The next morning, a woman came into the bakery shortly after 10. She wore navy blue medical scrubs beneath a worn beige coat, and her auburn hair was pulled into a loose knot that looked as if it had been fixed in a hurry. Tiredness clung to her face, but it could not hide the softness in her features or the fierce determination in her gray-green eyes. She introduced herself as Marin Vale, Orrin's mother, and placed a $10 bill on the counter. She thanked me for the pie, then apologized in the breathless way people do when they are trying not to fall apart in public. She explained that Orrin had taken money from his piggy bank because the previous day had been her birthday, and he had wanted to surprise her. He had miscounted what he had. She had been working extra shifts and hadn't realized where he had gone until he returned home carrying the box. Marin spoke quickly, as though gratitude was dangerous if she allowed herself to feel too much of it. I told her she didn't owe me anything. She insisted. I refused. We passed the bill back and forth across the counter twice before Oren's words returned to me, the ones about making his mother smile. I finally told her that she could repay me by sitting down for 10 minutes and accepting a cup of coffee before she went wherever she was rushing to next. She almost declined, but exhaustion won. She sat at a small table near the window while sunlight moved across the wooden floor. I brought her coffee and a warm blueberry scone. She told me she worked as a nursing assistant at Bryer County Rehabilitation Center. Her shifts changed constantly, and she had recently begun taking weekend hours because her rent had increased. Oren's father had left when the boy was 4, promising to stay involved and then gradually disappearing until even the birthday cards stopped. Maren did not say this with bitterness. She said it with the flat calm of someone who had already spent all her anger and had only responsibilities left. That I listened without offering advice. People often imagine that lonely people have nothing to give, but loneliness had taught me how to recognize when someone needed silence more than solutions. Maren finished her coffee, thanked me again, and left the $10 bill beneath the saucer. I found it after she had gone. Instead of putting it in the register, I pinned it to the bulletin board in the kitchen beside a faded photograph of Merrick and me covered in flour on the bakery's opening day. Over the next few weeks, Oren began stopping by after school. At first, he only looked through the window. Then he came inside and sat at the table nearest the counter, completing his homework while waiting for Maren to finish her shift. Their apartment was 6 blocks away, and the bakery sat along the safest route. Maren had arranged for a neighbor to check on him, but the neighbor's health had worsened, leaving Oren alone for an hour most afternoons. I told Maren he could stay at the bakery as long as he did not interfere with customers or steal my best recipes. She smiled at the joke, and something in me shifted when I saw how different her face looked without worry tightening it. Oren became my unofficial assistant. He folded pastry boxes, wiped tables, and learned how to shape small bread rolls. He asked endless questions about yeast, ovens, and why pie crust cracked if handled too much. I taught him that dough responded badly to force. The harder you worked it, the tougher it became. Some things needed a gentler hand. One afternoon, I realized Maren was standing by the door watching us. Oren had flour on his nose, and I was pretending not to notice that his rolls were shaped like stones. Maren's eyes shone with an emotion she quickly hid by looking down at her phone. Spring approached slowly. The mornings became brighter, and customers began carrying less winter with them when they entered. Maren sometimes arrived early enough to sit for coffee. She told me about her dream of becoming a registered nurse, a dream she had postponed when Oren was born and buried when his father left. She had recently begun looking at evening programs, but tuition seemed impossible. I told her impossible was often just a word people used when the road was longer than they wished. She gave me a skeptical smile and said that sounded like something printed on a cheap poster. I admitted Merrick had once said it after we discovered the bakery roof needed replacing 2 weeks before opening. That was the first time I told her much about him. Once I started, the memories came more easily than expected. I told her about Merrick giving away food, burning the first 40 croissants we attempted, and singing badly whenever he was nervous. Maren listened the way I had listened to her, without trying to repair what could not be repaired. When I finished, she rested her hand on the table between us, close to mine but not touching it. That small distance felt more intimate than a kiss. Things might have continued gently if life had not decided to test every fragile hope at once. In late March, the rehabilitation center cut Maren's hours after losing a major contract. The same week, her landlord gave notice that the building had been sold and tenants had 60 days to leave. Maren tried to hide the situation from Oren, but children understand fear even when adults change its name. He became quiet at the bakery. He stopped asking questions and began saving half of every snack I offered him, wrapping it carefully in a napkin for later. One afternoon, I found him studying a housing advertisement from the newspaper. He asked how far away Millstone was. I told him nearly 2 hours by bus. His face fell. Marin had found an affordable room there, but accepting it would mean changing Oren's school and leaving her job. I wanted to tell him they would not have to go. I wanted to promise something I had no right to promise. Instead, I handed him a lump of dough and asked him to help me make the next day's rolls. That evening, after the bakery closed, I stood alone in the kitchen beneath the fluorescent lights and stared at Merrick's old photograph. Above the bakery was a two-bedroom apartment we had once planned to renovate and rent out. For years, I had used it for storage because I could not afford the repairs. The place needed paint, plumbing work, and new cabinets, but it was solid. I had savings set aside for replacing the industrial mixer, and using them would be foolish. The mixer already groaned every morning. My accountant had warned me that one serious expense could sink the business. Still, the next day I called a contractor. I did not tell Marin until the apartment was nearly finished. When I finally walked her upstairs, sunlight streamed through newly cleaned windows onto pale walls and refinished floors. Oren ran from room to room, his happiness echoing through the empty space. Marin remained near the doorway, staring at me with shock and suspicion. I explained that the apartment had been unused for years and that I needed someone responsible living above the bakery. I offered a rent far below market price in exchange for her helping with bookkeeping a few hours each week. It was a practical arrangement, I insisted. She knew it was not entirely practical. Her expression hardened because pride often protects the places fear has wounded. She asked whether I was trying to rescue her. I told her no one rescued another person by offering a door. The person still had to choose to walk through it. She turned away, pressing her lips together, and for a moment I thought I had gone too far. Then Oren called from the smaller bedroom, asking whether he could put his model airplanes near the window. Marin covered her face with both hands and began to cry. They moved in on the first Saturday of April. Customers arrived carrying donated lamps, dishes, curtains, and a small desk for Oren. The bakery smelled of fresh bread and floor polish. For the first time since Merrick's death, the building felt alive above and below. I heard footsteps overhead while I prepared the next morning's dough. Sometimes Oren came down in slippers to ask for warm milk. Sometimes Marin joined me before sunrise, wearing an oversized sweater over her pajamas, and sat quietly at the counter while I worked. The story unfolded mostly in daylight, but those peaceful minutes before sunrise became the bridge between our old lives and whatever we were beginning to build. Marin enrolled in an evening nursing program after receiving financial aid. I helped Oren with dinner on class nights, though my cooking beyond baked goods was questionable. He complained about my pasta, praised my grilled cheese, and gradually began treating the bakery as if it had always belonged to him. Marin tried repeatedly to repay every kindness with work, cleaning tables that were already clean and organizing receipts after midnight. I finally told her she did not need to earn the right to be cared for. The words silenced both of us because I realized I was speaking to myself as much as to her, yet the closer we became, the more afraid I grew. I had lived for years believing love was a door through which loss eventually entered. Caring for Oren frightened me. Wanting Marin frightened me more. I began creating distance without meaning to. I stayed in the kitchen when she came down for coffee. I found excuses to leave while Oren did homework. Marin noticed. Her smiles became careful, and the warmth between us cooled into politeness. Then, one bright Saturday morning, Oren disappeared. Marin came racing downstairs, pale and breathless, saying his bed was empty and his backpack was gone. We searched the apartment, the bakery, the alley, and the nearby park. Panic stripped every sensible thought from me. I remembered Merrick's accident, the phone call, the unbearable helplessness of being too late. Marin called the police while I ran toward Oren's school, scanning every sidewalk and storefront that I found him sitting outside the closed community center with his backpack beside him and a glass jar full of coins in his lap. His cheeks were wet. He had heard Marin talking on the phone about tuition expenses and believed they were becoming a burden. He planned to sell the model airplanes he had built and use his savings so they would not have to leave the apartment. As I knelt in front of him beneath the clear morning sun, something inside me broke open. I told him he and his mother were not debts waiting to be collected. They were not guests counting down their days. They were family, even if none of us had been brave enough to say it. Maren arrived moments later and pulled Oren against her. After the police left and the fear settled into exhausted relief, the three of us walked back to the bakery. Oren went upstairs to rest, leaving Maren and me alone near the display case where he had first asked for the pie. Sunlight spread across the counter. The brass bell was still. Outside, people passed with shopping bags and strollers, unaware that my entire life was changing inside that small room. Maren said she had thought my distance meant I regretted helping them. I admitted the truth. I had not been pulling away because I wanted them gone. I had been pulling away because I wanted them to stay, and wanting something that deeply had become terrifying. She looked at me for a long moment, tears gathering in her eyes. Then she said she had spent years teaching herself not to need anyone. Depending on people had always ended in disappointment. But somewhere between the free pie, the afternoon homework, the flower-covered counters, and hearing my footsteps downstairs each morning, something had changed. She stepped closer and whispered, "I started wanting you. Not the apartment. Not the help. You." I had imagined that love would arrive dramatically, like thunder or music. Instead, it arrived in daylight, surrounded by cooling racks and the scent of apples and cinnamon. I reached for her hand. She let me take it. There were no promises that life would become easy. Her classes would be demanding. The bakery remained one broken mixer away from disaster. Oren still carried fears that would take time to heal, and I still woke some mornings missing my brother so sharply that breathing felt difficult. But love was not the absence of hardship. It was choosing who stood beside you when hardship came. Months later, Morning Hearth began selling a new dessert called Oren's Tomorrow Pie. A portion of every sale went into a small fund that provided meals for local families facing financial trouble. Oren designed the sign himself. Maren completed her first semester near the top of her class, and I finally replaced the failing mixer after customers organized a fundraiser without telling me. The bakery never became the chain Merrick and I had once imagined, but it became something better. It became a place where people understood that needing help was not shameful and that kindness did not have to be large to change the direction of a life. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Lifeline Vibes. Your support helps stories of kindness, healing, and second chances reach people who may need a reminder that one compassionate choice can change everything. On the first anniversary of the day Oren asked to pay tomorrow, Maren and I placed an apple pie on the same counter. Oren stood between us, taller than he had been the year before, proudly counting the money from the charity jar. The bakery was crowded with afternoon customers, sunlight glowing through the windows just as it had that first day. Maren leaned against my shoulder, and I looked at the two people who had entered my life because a child had been short a few dollars. Special request, comment: kindness always comes back if you believe. Even the smallest generous act can become the beginning of something beautiful. I once thought I gave away the last pie of the day. In truth, that little boy gave me something far greater. He gave me a reason to open my heart again. He brought laughter back into rooms that had been silent for years. And through him, I found a woman who did not ask me to forget the people I had lost, but taught me that loving again was not a betrayal of the past. It was proof that the love we lose can still guide us toward the love waiting ahead.